that's an idea. Now that's an idea. Now that's an idea. Now that's an idea.
So, kia ora and welcome to Now That's an Idea. Today I am joined by Julian Kohn from the Eastland Wood Council. So, how are you today? What's been going on in Tairāwhiti at the moment?
Good. Thank you very much for inviting us. As I said, the weather's stunning here in Gisborne, as it always is. So we're looking forward to a good summer. It's been pretty dry. And I think if things continue this way, then it's going to be a fun times in Tairāwhiti over the next few months. Absolutely.
I think I've jinxed the weather the last kind of 4 years because I'm like, this year is going to be the year of a cracker summer, and then somehow it keeps raining at New Year's, but we make it through.
Well, that's right. It's a little unfortunate. So on 24th of December, it decides to rain. So let's see how we go this year. Be optimistic.
This is the year.
This is the year.
So you are the chairman of the Eastland Wood Council. I think just before we start it, because we're going to talk about something juicy, which is this is talk about some talk of putting forest into permanent, either natives or just permanent forest of some kind. But before we talked about that, I just wanted to maybe chat a little bit first, what is the Eastland Wood Council, and then second, how did you get into forestry? Because I know it's a big culture and industry on the coast, and one that is kind of supports a lot of people and gets a lot of flack. So I'd just like to talk about how did you get it? Yeah, maybe we'll start with how did you get into forestry?
I got into forestry because I started off by wanting to be a lawyer when I was 13. My father was a lawyer and his father was a lawyer. And I thought, I'll just be a lawyer. But I used to spend an awful lot of time in the bush hunting with my father, and I always enjoyed being outdoors. So I worked in forests and on farms when I was at school and went off to law school. I was a failed law student. I didn't want to finish a BA or a BSc. And I had the opportunity to get in the New Zealand Forest Service Ranger School back in 1980. And that was a 4-year course. You could either do what's equivalent of a diploma or a degree in those days. And I'd just been to university, so I didn't want to go back to university. So I ended up doing NZCF, which is a diploma equivalent these days. So I qualified that in 1984 with the New Zealand Forest Service as a forest ranger. And that qualified foresters and rangers around New Zealand to manage forest in its broadest sense. This idea that foresters these days only manage or only qualified to manage radiata estates is completely incorrect. We are qualified to manage forests in its broadest sense. After working for the Forest Service very briefly after I qualified, I decided I wanted to go home. I am a local, Tairāwhiti local, and third or fourth generation. I have kaupapa going back through my parents' marriage for my stepmother, which goes back to Tātou Wairoa and Ngāti Porou. So I claim tangata whena status there as well. So I have some very deep connections with the land and are very passionate about being able to provide the best quality of environmental and economic and social well-being for our community. So for me, the current position I have got is something I've only had for about 18 months, but I am one of the original members of the East Coast Eastland Wood Council, I should say. I can't even remember when we started. It was sort of in the early 90s, perhaps.
You've been
I've been around for probably far too long, some people would say. I was the chair for 10 years back in the 90s. And I have been a forest consultant in my own right. I had a company called Control Forest Services for many, many years. And worked primarily on the East Coast here, developing and managing forests for owners up in Northland, Southland, a little bit of overseas work, but generally here on the East Coast. I took this role after eventually retiring about 5 or 6 years ago because, well, I was asked eventually, but I had essentially retired. But I saw that I would be able to contribute by way of my experience and knowledge, and I hope my passion around what we needed to improve our general well-being in the community. And this is not about necessarily forestry, it's about me as a local. I want this community to thrive. I want our economic data to improve. We are very poor relative to the rest of the country, and our average income is about 30% lower than the national average, which doesn't bode well for any home or any individual living in the community. Our health statistics are terrible. Our infrastructure's bad for a number of reasons. One of the ways we can improve that is to look to try and improve the economics of our community by generating wealth and income for everybody. But to do that, we need to do that sustainably. We need to have a balance between the economics and the environmental and the social outgoings of what our community is. So I saw an opportunity to do my bit as being part of the Eastland Wood Council to try and make that happen. So that's what we're trying to do, and that's what I'm trying to do.
So you've been called back in to do your part. Yeah, and then so I think the next part is what is the Eastland Wood Council? Because I guess from what I've always thought about it was kind of just like it's like an industry body for all the companies on the coast, and maybe a bit like lobbying for your point of view about how things can be done well and better, perhaps. Is that kind of basically what it is?
Yeah, I mean, that's not a bad summary. The Eastland Wood Council is a grouping, if you like, of all of the major and intermediate size, even small size forest companies and some of the processors in the region. So we represent about 132,000 hectares of about 160,000 hectares of radiata pine, which is in the district. Radiata makes up about 15% of our land area in the region. And yes, we are there to try and promote our industry and to work on issues which we feel are important to ensuring that we have the right outcomes by way of the economics and environmental issues which we have always faced and will always face going forward.
And so obviously we're going to just talk about this idea to move some land into permanent vegetation. But before that, why is Tairāwhiti so good at growing pine trees? Because I know it doesn't happen by accident that a lot of the East Coast is just in pine trees, because they just grow bloody fast. Is that right?
Yeah, well, radiata essentially grows pretty quickly in New Zealand, full stop. It is effectively an improvement on a breed of Monterey pine, which came from an island off the coast of California many years ago. And the Forest Research Institute was very good at improving the growth rates and the performance of those seedlings. They brought them to New Zealand, and the first ones were planted in probably back in the early 1900s, and on the East Coast back in about 1959 was the first year radiata was planted up in the Wairaratas. They grow well in New Zealand, as I said, but they grow exceptionally well on the East Coast of North Island. It's just they seem to like the climate. They do like a little bit of cold. They do like a little bit of heat. They do like a reasonable amount of water. So, of course, the combination of that makes for a very good growing environment for radiata. There are one or two other places around the South Island which grow equally good pines down in Southland and so on. But, yes, we seem to do a pretty good job of it up here.
Yeah. And so, as I've been alluding to, there's been like an article on the Gisborne Herald and some talk about converting, basically, it's about, was it 10% of the land into basically retiring it, I guess, into permanent vegetation. I could give a summary, but I've got a feeling that you probably know a lot more about this. So maybe not so much from a Eastland Council point of view, but just as a whole, can you explain like what the plan is? And then after that, we can talk about what you kind of agree and disagree on certain aspects of the plan.
Okay. So the intention is to change the cover, the vegetation type on the worst of the eroding land in the region. And it is essentially being classified as what we call LO3B. So it is the worst of the gullies and faces and sides of catchments, which are either eroding. The council is not exactly sure. Nobody actually knows how much area exactly is involved, but the common numbers are anything between sort of 40 and 100,000 hectares. The forest industry has done mapping in its own forests, or the Eastland Wood Council ones at least have, and we believe that of our sort of 132,000 hectares, about 18% of that is currently mapped as LO3B. Now, those numbers, of course, are fairly broad and imprecise, and they will need significant ground truthing and checking to make sure that they are, in fact, accurate. But then the intention is to change the vegetation cover on those areas. And I'm not just talking about radiata pine, I'm talking about areas which include farmland. So, some areas, of course, will be covered in grass at this stage. So the conversation has been around what that might look like by way of cover. How do you change grass into some form of a vegetation cover? How do you change lightly scrubbed areas into a more permanent vegetation cover, which will get a soil control? How do you change radiata mid-rotation and mature radiata into some other form of vegetation cover, which is more appropriate for that? Now, the definition of permanent vegetation cover has not been identified yet. The council said that they're going to do that in their TRMP. But there's a lot of conversation about, should it be 100% natives? Should it be a combination of natives and exotics? All of those decisions need to be made on a very sort of a site-by-site basis. So the management of those sites needs to be very bespoke, and that's a conversation that needs to happen between the landowner and the council as to how that happens. It is something which is going to take decades and will cost an awful lot of money. And the council is currently putting a business case to the government around what that might look like and what it might cost in the first 10 years. The industry has some, in principle, is very much in favour of land use change, and a lot of what's happening in the forest, and has done for a few years, has been by way of turning those gullies and guts and catchments into other vegetation cover by way of natives and so on. So it's not actually new to the industry. It's something that we have been doing and are doing now, but obviously it needs to scale up. So the industry is absolutely in favour of land use change where appropriate. But of course, the devil's in the detail. What is it going to look like over the next 10 years? There are very serious implications financially from the emissions trading scheme, which nobody understands at the moment, and the industry is just starting to sort of delve into what that might look now. We still don't understand the scale of the problem, because in forestry, if we have gullies and areas which are retired and put into another form of vegetation, there will be significant areas around those edges which are riparians. You don't know the size of what those riparians might look like. And we'll have other areas on the other side of those gullied areas which we may not be able to get to harvest, which are outside overlay 3B and are perfectly good in terms of the quality of timber which is there. But if we can't get to them, then of course we have what we call stranded assets. So all of those factors make very, very significant impact on the financial viability of the industry. And that's what is very, very concerning from our point of view. We don't know what we don't know, essentially. And some of those forest companies, when you take 20 or 30% of their land area away, you can imagine what effect that has on their balance sheet. And people will often say, well, that's just the way it is. Well, that may or may not be the case, but the perverse outcome of all, of course, it is that if you put so much debt essentially onto the balance sheet, those companies are just going to walk away. If those companies walk away from their forests, then next time we have a Cyclone Gabriel, those trees are not going to be removed by humans. They're going to be removed by the environment, and they're going to end up coming down the gullies and onto the beaches.
Yeah. And the thing is that people have bought these properties under rules saying that they can, operate there, and whatever capacity they can. So to change it, 10 years, 20 years on creates, pulling the carpet out under them. That's not quite the right saying. Pulling the rug out under
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
So yeah, there is, but at the same time, as you've said, like even the forestry industry agrees, change is needed. So it's just working out this kind of complex situation. Yeah, and so in the article I was reading, it said, the number thrown out there was something like $350 million over 10 years, to fund some of this work, which is like it's just an astronomical number. But also there's some, some of the cleanup work. There's some huge numbers there too. But
Yeah.
what's that $350 million going to actually cover? Is that just people planting trees?
Well, essentially, yes, but of course, there's you don't just go out and plant trees. One of the major issues which the region causes is about pest control. And of course, it doesn't take too much thought to realise that if you plant seedlings on a face in the middle of the bush, in the middle of nowhere, then they're going to be great food for the likes of deer and goats, particularly. And of course, the whole region has a huge deer population explosion and has done for some time. So if you are going to spend any money on anything, one of the highest priorities needs to be pest control. And it's not on a property by property basis or a catchment by catchment basis. It's on a regional basis, because you can kill the animals in one area, and of course they'll just filter out over the ridge and come down into where you've just eliminated them. And it has to be ongoing, and as I say, it has to be of real scale. So pest control is, we say in forestry, if you're going to grow good trees, particularly natives, it's about pest control, pest control, and pest control. And Mother Nature is very, very good at recovering. So in many of these areas, it may not be a case of having to replant, but it might be just a matter of controlling the pests and letting Mother Nature do its thing, and the vegetation will come away by natural revegetation processes. So it's going to be a combination of those sort of things: replanting, nurseries, labour, spraying. Resource consenting is going to be a major issue, which is a problem that we have at the moment, and we're discussing with the council. How do we get over this situation where we have trees in areas where we all want to get rid of them to enact land use change, but the current consenting conditions which the council are enforcing are literally making it impossible, not difficult, not hard, impossible for the companies to operate under. So again, we have a perverse situation where we can't do what we're all trying to achieve. So it makes it very, very frustrating.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is a whole lot of Gisborne hunters could actually have a full-time job going shooting deer for 10 years. I actually work for one of my jobs is I work at a restaurant here, and there's actually a company called With Wild, and basically they go in helicopters around Milford Sound, basically, and up in the mountains, and just shooting wapiti deer, and then they process that and send it off to like restaurants all around New Zealand. So at the same time as they're pests, they're also just delicious animals that could be sold for a profit by someone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a hunter myself, and venison's one of my favorite meats. But you'd have to be extremely hungry to eat all the deer which are living in this region, and it does happen. Farmers get helicopters in periodically to shoot deer, but it's just simply not enough. You need to coordinate a large scale, consistent, professional operation to make it happen over a long time.
Well, hey, maybe something with Wild could be organized. You never know.
You never know.
And then so kind of broadening out from that, because obviously this is what are they called? A wicked problem in the policy world, where there's multifaceted. There's no kind of like clear solution, but it just takes like a lot of work and collaboration. But what about the forestry industry as a whole on the East Coast? Like, it's very much an industry of boom and bust and, all these kind of different problems and things going on. But where is it going in the future, do you reckon? Because we've got this wicked new restarting of the old sawmill. So there's some things happening, but where do you see the forestry industry growing?
Well, I think you've got to step back a little bit and just look about what's happening on the international stage at the moment. Since COVID, there have been major issues in respect to the Chinese log market, which, of course, the vast majority of New Zealand's and Tairāwhiti's logs go to. So the pricing and the value of logs has been very challenging for forest companies to make money out of it. So, I mean, that has been a major problem for them. We're also struggling at the moment in respect of compliance costs and processes, as I mentioned before. So that's adding costs to it. We are losing very capable professional harvesting crews, which we need in this region to enact the land use change that we're talking about. So, yeah, to be perfectly honest, the industry is struggling. I don't think we're going to get back to the years and days when we were pre-COVID. We were processing something like 4.5 million tonne of logs in the region on an annual basis. Our current cut last year, I think, was about 2.7 million tonnes went through the port. Depending on how our conversations go in respect of these resource consents and land use change, I can see that the industry certainly will shrink from where it is now in some respects. Of course, that might all change if the market starts booming and we can get good, consistent rules and regulations around the RMA. So it's a little bit of crystal ball gazing, if you like. So it's very hard to say, Jack. But from there are some good things happening in the industry. We are committed to land use change. We are looking at revegetation of the worst of those areas already without this tag conversation which is going on. It's been happening anyway. We have some very capable young people coming into the industry, and the Malawi group purchase of the Julian mill meant that although 65 people had lost their jobs at the mill there 12 months ago, which is very unfortunate, from what I understand, the vast majority of them have sort of come back to that mill, and that mill now employs 110 people. It's owned by an Australian company, which of course is all pretty familiar to New Zealanders. The exchange rate is quite good. We understand how they operate, very similar business processes. And the majority of that product is going into an Australian market, which is absolutely hungry for the product, and they're looking at hugely increasing their volumes over the next 3 years. So that's a very good news story for the region. There's another processing operation who is very close to pulling the trigger here by way of developing some wood pelleting operation. And in fact, that wood pelleting operation would consume a significant volume of what some people call slash, but woody waste off skid sites, other areas where might not otherwise be used in any other economic form. So part of their process will involve getting some of that wood waste out of the risky areas and bringing it down and using it in their operation. But again, that's contingent on what happens with these consenting conversations. Yeah, while it's not, there's a lot of, you could say there's a lot of negative things happening here. The industry as a whole looks down into this region and will not invest in forest development, land purchases, and anything of any consequence until things settle down a bit. And if they do, then we have huge potential in this region to improve the well-being of the community.
So definitely sounding like a mixed bag.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Watch this space.
Yeah. I know it's an industry really focused on, Pinus radiata, but is there much talk of like selective logging? Like, I know there's, turning all these places into permanent forest, but, you could have, redwoods or, really like exotic, expensive trees that it could make sense to, plant them sporadically on people's land and then harvest individual logs and fly them out. Is that kind of on anyone's radar, or is that kind of not really in the game plan?
Well, the industry has always done that in various places, both in a native situation and an exotic situation over the years, Jack. So that's nothing new to us. And it's something that we'd certainly like to see put into the mix in the respect of this tag operation, whereby you have long rotation, sort of 90, 100-year rotation species which have good root structures, and perhaps do coppice, and so will retain good soil retention properties, but allow you to, at some stage, get some form of income off, and even if it was sort of a neutral cost-benefit type outcome. And I think a lot of landowners, not just corporate forestry or investment forestry, would like to see something like that by way of a compromise. So we are very concerned about what permanent vegetation cover means at the moment. We don't understand what the definition of that is, which makes us very nervous. And there are operations down Nelson City Council are looking at they're converting about 10,000 hectares of council-owned forests into native at the moment. And in fact, they are using exotic species as nursery crops to plant, to shelter native species and allow them to come away. And then, of course, they'll just either poison them or fell those exotic species along the rotation. So there's lots of ways you can mix and match exotics with natives. And as I said before, it's about a bespoke answer in a bespoke situation. But we need to be open to all of those options. So this idea that natives are going to solve 100% of our problems on the east coast of the North Island simply isn't worth it. The exotics are, relatively speaking, a lot cheaper to establish and maintain than natives. So, if you're just looking at pure economics, there's one positive for planting some exotics. I think the Nelson City Council are talking about sort of an 80-20 mix or something like that.
And it would be remiss of me not to bring up Tairāwhiti's favourite topic to complain about, but the roads. Just kind of any throwaway ideas you've got on how to have better roads? Because I was thinking about this the other day. It's basically we've got trucks that are really heavy on the roads. Can we not just have like more tires or bigger tires? Or is there like some easy way we can just?
Do you work for a tire company that's sponsoring this today? Are they?
Well, I was thinking you want weight distribution, better weight distribution, or like less things on trucks. I don't know. Got any ideas?
Well, the weight configuration on all trucks is about axle weight distribution. So, there's set standards and design for that sort of thing. Fundamentally, the issue is that the soil structure and our geography on the east coast of the North Island means that when it rains, the way it rains, the soil types we have just do not want to stay on the roads or on the faces. All they want to do is end up ultimately in the sea. So we are always going to be faced with problems with road maintenance and road construction. There's just absolutely no way to get around it. It doesn't matter how well you engineer a road, it will fail at some stage. So it's about good design, good construction, and timely maintenance. The conversations, we are having some fairly productive conversations with the roading division of the council at the moment about putting a business case to the government, which would allow us to work on a couple of the major arterial roads up the coast to try and reconstruct them effectively so that they will maintain them at a level which will allow them to be a more appropriate mode of transport for those using, including private individuals and logging trucks, stock trucks, whatever use them. But it is an issue. The forest industry builds far more roads kilometre-wise and maintains far more roads and skids than any other roading organisation in the district. So we actually believe we are very good at designing and building roads which are pretty resilient. And certainly it's demonstrated in the last sort of few years since Cyclone Gabriel, that roading forest construction with skids and roads has held up very, very well after those events. So we're certainly getting better at it. I don't claim to think that we've got it quite right yet. We are learning by doing, and we are still making mistakes, but we're getting there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and having a conversation about Tairāwhiti's favourite topics, forestry, roads, and hunting. Absolute pleasure to have you on.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jack. See you later.
Now that's an idea.